Hello to you all, wherever this virtual meeting may find you. My name is Ali Assasi, and it's a great pleasure and honor for me to act as moderator for today's special event. Thank you to each and every one of you for joining us for this discussion organized jointly by the Parliamentarians for Global Action and the Raoul Wallenberg Centre for Human Rights. Now, as you know, we're fortunate to devote today's event to a critical discussion about a compelling and recently released documentary that chronicles the plight of a heroic Iranian lawyer and icon, Ms. NASRIN Sotoudeh. Ms. Sotoudeh, as you all know by now, has been an indefatigable figure at the forefront of advocating on behalf of children, women's rights, and more generally, human rights in Iran for the past several decades. Ms. Sotoudeh is currently serving a prison sentence for her legal defense of young women protesting the hijab in Iran. This documentary focuses, amongst others, on the many challenges faced by those who dare to fearlessly act as the voice of the voiceless and showcases the many personal sacrifices such individuals and their relatives face when simply attempting to stand their ground in defense of such concepts as civil society, procedural due process, or the rule of law. The documentary NASRIN is one that radiates with urgency and stands for the proposition that we can and must do our part to promote public awareness and public pressure when championing the cause of imperiled individuals around the world. In other words, it speaks to our collective responsibility to stitch, or alternatively to weave, a cloak of security around vulnerable individuals around the world who are at the forefront of promoting civic change and effecting peaceful reform. Now, first, allow me to start off by introducing our first panelist. It's my privilege to introduce the extraordinary team of Jeff Kaufman and Marcia Ross of Floating World Pictures. Jeff and Marcia are the tour de force team, if you will, responsible for directing and producing the documentary of NASRIN. I should add that both Jeff and Marcia have an enviable wealth of experience prior to producing this documentary, and first started working on this documentary as early as 2016. Jeff Kaufman has been an American film producer, director, writer, and illustrator since the early 1990s, having produced numerous award-winning documentaries. Marcia Ross has similarly enjoyed an over 3-decade career as an independent casting director and casting executive, having worked for many years as an executive for Disney Motion Pictures and Warner Brothers Television. Much like Jeff, she has received many career achievement awards. Please join me for the next segment of today's event.
Thank you very much. And thanks for everyone for joining us, both for hosting this event, for focusing on NASRIN and others like her, and for joining us today.
Yes. We're so happy to be here today.
We'd like to share some remarks about NASRIN, the process of making this film, the way it's connected us to so many other good people like you. But I think the first thing perhaps to do is to show a couple clips from the film, if we're all ready to do that. And we can set them up. I think one will run after the other. They're not actually sequential in the film itself. And of course, we urge you to see the film, and you can go to www.nasrinfilm.com to see the film, but also to get involved on behalf of NASRIN. Let me introduce the first clip, and then you want to introduce the second clip?
Sure.
We're a team. So the first clip, when we first talked to NASRIN, it was always about doing a film that, through her, connected us to so many other remarkable people. And she didn't want it just to be about herself. She never does. And we always felt that this was really a community effort. I love the fact that you Ali said, talked about our collective responsibility. It's a collective film. So one of the sequences in the film is NASRIN is driving by in Tehran, the building where they used to house meetings, where they arranged the 1 million signatures campaign. And this was a group of women who came together, realizing that they wanted to work through and reform the system, reform the laws, and make the laws of Iran fully represent and respect women in their society. And so they wanted to get 1 million signatures, and they went across Iran to do so. And it was a very stirring group effort, but also one that was ultimately in part crushed by the government. And then the next scene.
So in the second scene, we're going to show you. So while we were making the film, NASRIN became involved in the Girls of Revolution Street movement. And that was where women all across Iran were taking off their headscarves in public to protest the mandatory hijab law. And she took on cases of these young women and older women, women of all ages actually were doing this, as you'll see in the film. And she began to represent and participate in this movement by her representation. And ultimately, it is the reason that she's currently in prison, as she was arrested for this legal work on behalf of these women.
بذارید یه خاطره رو براتون بگم. حدود 10 سال پیش که کمپین 1 میلیون امضا برای تغییر تبعیض‌آمیز قوانین، در واقع این برای برابری زنان در ایران فعالیت می‌کرد، یه دفتری داشت، زیرزمینی بود در همین خیابون سلیمان خاتم. ما اونجا خیلی وقتا جمع می‌شدیم، تصمیم می‌گرفتیم راجع به موضوعاتی که با اونا مواجه می‌شدیم. خوب بود. یه تعداد خانم اومدن جمع شدن در اعتراض به قوانین تبعیض‌آمیز کمپین 1 میلیون امضا رو تشکیل دادن. مطابق اون داشتن امضا جمع آوری میکردن که ببرن بدن به مجلس قانونگذاری، بگن قوانین مربوط به زنان رو تغییر بدید. اما یک به یک اومدن اینا رو بازداشت کردن، بردن احکام سنگین صادر کردن. خیلیا به زندان اوین افتاده بودن. اگر امروز به ما میگفتن زنها آزادن که بی حجاب برن خیابون، برای هیچ کدوم ما ارزشی نداشت. برای اینکه اگر دست اونایی که هر روز سر ما روسری بذارن یا اجازه بدن برداریم، همیشه وابسته به اونا میشه این تصمیم گیری. اما اگه با همین کارا ما بتونیم آزادی پوشش خودمون رو به دست بیاریم، برامون ماندگار میشه. اینه که این پرونده برای من اهمیت داره.
بیشتر دستشون اومده که مامان وقتی میگه که یه چیزی باید اینطوری باشه، همون یه کاری میکنه که اون اتفاق بیفته، یعنی جا نمیزنه. من به خودم بارها گفته بودم که من کاملا ایمان دارم به کاری که تو انجام میدی.
Well, those are two, if we're back on, those are two clips from the documentary NASRIN. And again, they connect not just to NASRIN, but to so many other remarkable women and men who are trying to improve civil society in that country. And by seeing Merva, their daughter, at the end, it also points to the fact that this is all about the next generation. And not just the next generation in Iran, but really the next generation across the world. How can we connect that generation to the importance of human rights, that collective responsibility, and that includes here in the United States as well. I'd like to pass it to Marcia in just a second, but let me just reflect on one thing, if I could. Thinking about Merva at her age, she's 19, 20 years old, Nasreen and Reza's daughter. And when I was 19 or 20, I went to New York, and I remember so distinctly seeing on Fifth Avenue a protest against abuses of human rights in Iran, a protest against Savak, the Shah's terrorist organization. And there were people lined on the street, and they were demonstrating tortures that they experienced in that country. Years later, I had a radio show, and I remember interviewing a former CIA officer who worked in Iran at that time and talked about, it wasn't his central focus, but just offhandedly talking about knowing of tortures by the Shah while he was stationed in Iran. That just points to this long history between these two countries. With the human rights abuses being amplified even more after the 1979 revolution, over and over and over again, we struggle with trying to make society better, struggle with trying to improve human rights. And now we are having one of those moments where it's a historic moment, an opportunity to perhaps put the two countries on a better track. And that's a slow, hard process. It involves a sense of history, but it also means seizing the moment. And I hope all of this can be part of seizing the moment, both for Nasreen, but for our two countries as well. It's long overdue.
So one of the things that Jeff and I talk a lot about, and I think is important to us, is that a lot of people, at least in the United States, know very little about
Sorry, that's our coffee maker in the background. Forgive us.
They don't know much about Iran, and it's very typical. We don't learn about it in school unless you're from there. You don't really know much about it, and we often only know about other countries through what we read about in the newspaper. I mean, even Canada and the United States, it's government to government. It's not people to people, and it was really important for us to show both the beautiful, vibrant, and historical culture of Iran, but also the common humanity we share with our fellow citizens around the world. Because I think that until people can relate to people, like themselves and see themselves in others, everyone feels so separate and so different. And so we wanted to really capture that in the film. So there are always questions people ask, why did we make this film, and how did we make this film? So we made the film because Jeff had come across Nasreen when he was making an earlier film called Education Under Fire about the persecution of the Baha'i faith in Iran. And he was very taken with the idea that, Muslim neighbors were defending their Baha'i friends, because they are heavily persecuted, can't be educated. And Nasreen took on Baha'i clients, and that really stuck with him. And when we were finishing our last film, Nasreen her name was appearing more and more in the news. So we went back and we started to really think about her as a subject for a film. And we felt that, this was the time we wanted to tell her story. We wanted to make sure her story got told so that it wasn't somewhere buried in the history books and forgotten, because the worst thing you can do is forget. And I think also someone as unique as Nasreen should have, we wanted to have her story told in a way that really reflected her version of her life. So we were introduced to her and we approached her and we asked her about it. We had a lot of concerns about her safety and Reza's safety and the family's safety and everybody in the film's safety. And that was the main issue for us always. And we asked many, many times. We would have stopped making the film at any time had we felt it was too dangerous. The other thing we also did was we kept the film secret for the entire time that we made it, and up until we really premiered it last October in Boston, because we wanted to keep things under wraps for as long as we could. I think Jeff should probably talk about how we made this film, because we obviously couldn't go to Iran. It would have been too dangerous. And also, actually, I think it would have really hurt what we were able to accomplish, which is the level of intimacy in Nasreen's life that we achieve in the film.
Yeah, and when we started the film in 2016, obviously when you start something, it's building over time before you actually do the initial reach out. It was a time of horrible demonization of Islam in the United States for political purposes among some quarters, and also a continual demonization of Iran. And as Marcia says, one of our goals was always to try to bring alive the rich culture and the great people of Iran, even while distancing ourselves from the regime that runs it. It was obviously a great privilege to have NASRIN agree to work with us and to have some shared goals. So we couldn't go to Iran ourselves because of past work. And if we could, rolling up in Tehran with an American film crew is not a great way to get intimate access to someone who's being watched over by the government. So we were able to work with these really remarkable filmmakers in Iran who followed NASRIN, as you'll see, not just to protests or not just to private meetings with at-risk clients, but when she's shopping in a bookstore, when she's picking up her son Nima from school, at a production of a play, at an art gallery that looks like it's in, Soho in New York City. And all that wraps through NASRIN, and not only her commitment to an improved civil society, but her love of the arts and her belief that the arts are really a powerful way to move society forward. And over time, our relationship with NASRIN and Reza moved forward as well. I think one of the things that's so wonderful for me, and I hope that you can have this kind of connection to yourself, is here we are, we're 7,500 miles away from Tehran, and yet, I don't want to overstate it, but Marcia calls NASRIN and Reza and Merva and Nima, our other family. And to be able to have that relationship and to see someone who is so historically significant like NASRIN and Reza, but see them personally and see their warmth and humanity, and then feel the pain of their incarceration is a very powerful experience. And I guess one of the things I'd like to, the United Nations Special Rapporteur just released a report on human rights abuses in Iran 3 days ago. And he talked about the masses of people who've been arrested, over 200 executions over the last year, a number of those executions being children, the mass imprisonment and improper representation of political prisoners in Iran. And when we see those kind of headlines in the United States, it's kind of abstract. It's, that person. NASRIN and everyone like her is a very real person, separated from her family. She was on medical leave about a month ago. She has COVID, which she got in Garchak prison. She has a heart condition. They allowed her to go home for an angioplasty. Marcia and I had a Zoom chat with NASRIN and Reza one morning, and she said, well, I've got an extension on my medical leave so I can recuperate for a little while. Well, the very next morning, early the next morning, that was canceled. They like to sort of set you up and then break your heart. And she said she was told that she had to go back to prison that day. And on the way going to prison, it's about an hour-and-a-half drive from their home to Garchak prison, Reza and NASRIN found out that their bank accounts had also been frozen. So now she's in a windowless cell with dozens of other inmates, overcrowded. We understand so overcrowded that she has to share a bed with another inmate. They have to rotate beds and they have to rotate opportunities to eat because it's so overcrowded. This wonderful woman is now living under those circumstances. And so we hope this film will connect you to what she's going through and realize that, she's one of, sadly, tens of thousands around the world. And we hope you'll get involved and work on her case.
So I know there's going to be a question and answer period later before we turn it over. So, but if I don't have the opportunity, I hope everyone will watch the film if you haven't seen it. And if you have seen it, please tell everyone you know to see it. As Jeff mentioned, we have a website, NASRIN Film. We have a Facebook page. And it will show you where you can see the film. The film is continuing to expand around the world and will also be available beyond the United States and Canada starting March 8th in honor of International Women's Day. And I think, when we encourage people to see the film, it's actually, it's really not just as filmmakers. I mean, the more people can talk about NASRIN and the more that we can keep her name out there, and the film has certainly become part of that global conversation and a global outreach campaign to support her release and others like her from these horrible prisons for their human rights work, basically. The more, it's a blanket of safety for her. And it's also an emotional blanket on some level for the family. I can't express to you enough how much it has meant to Reza and NASRIN and the kids to hear from people all over the world who have seen the film and have been moved by the film and care about her and want to get involved in some way. And so, you know, please do watch the film if you haven't seen it already.
Yeah. I think we just have a minute left. So let me just say that the first time NASRIN got out on medical leave, after having had a 46-day hunger strike, we hadn't seen her for what, 2.5 years?
Yeah.
And it was just the most remarkable experience. And I'd love to have you just be with us in that moment. Here she is. She's got COVID. She's still smiling. She's still joking. She's still laughing. She's asking about our kids. And, you know, she expresses gratitude for everyone who was part of this campaign, this project, this film. And that's NASRIN. You know, she's not a plaster god. She's not, you know, a plaster saint, but she always uses her limelight, her moment, to advance the cause of others. And so we hope that you'll take this opportunity to find out more about her and the history of these two countries, but also the other people like her who all need our help, so we can sort of be part of that collective responsibility.
Absolutely extraordinary. A very, very big thank you to Jeff and Marcia. Given the intimacy of the documentary you've produced and the power of it, I have no doubt that you have really started a global dialogue, and we're all eternally grateful for that. Now, for the next segment of today's event, I have the honor of introducing our next two panelists. First, allow me to introduce someone who, in all likelihood, needs no introduction, the Honorable Irwin Cutler, the tireless founder and international chair of the Raoul Wallenberg Centre for Human Rights. An emeritus professor of law at McGill Law School, Mr. Cutler served as a member of Parliament in Canada from 1999 to 2015, and also served as the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada from 2003 to 2006. We're also incredibly delighted to have on today's panel Ms. Shopanak Shahjadizadeh, an exceptional Iranian women's rights activist and former political prisoner. She, for all of you who've had the opportunity to see the documentary, was one of the individuals who spearheaded the Girls of Revolution, or alternatively referred to as the White Wednesday initiative in Iran to protest against the compulsory hijab. We're incredibly honored to have these two panelists here with us today, and welcome to you both.
Thank you, Ali. May I begin by, commending you for your involvement over the years as a parliamentarian on the matters before us, to Jeff and Marcia for, as you put it, a very compelling documentary which humanizes NASRIN's case and cause, and indeed all those involved in it. Shaparak, who has personal experience having been represented by NASRIN. And I'm delighted to outline some of the initiatives that parliamentarians can take, including Parliamentarians for Global Action, on behalf of NASRIN's case and cause, and anchoring it in some of our experiences, Ali, as Canadian parliamentarians in that regard. The first is we initiated in 2010 what was called an Iran Accountability Week, in which Canadian parliamentarians would focus on the human rights situation in Iran, where we heard witness testimony from Iranian scholars, legal experts, former Iranian political prisoners, and all this to focus on the pain and plight, indeed, of the very people and the very cases and causes that NASRIN has been representing all these years. Women, journalists, religious minorities such as the Baha'i, juveniles destined for execution, peaceful protesters, in a word, as I said, all the groups that NASRIN has gone down the line for them, and then who herself was first convicted in 2010. We then launched also the Iranian Political Prisoner Advocacy Project, where MPs from all parties would adopt an Iranian political prisoner and use all the instrumentalities that Parliament would provide within and without Parliament to advocate on behalf of their case and cause. As it happened, the political prisoner that I adopted or was adopted for me in 2010 was NASRIN Sotoudeh. We also arranged at the time with a newspaper, the National Post, that they would run every day for a week op-eds by each of the parliamentarians who had taken up the case of a political prisoner, so that we could bring this to the attention of the larger Canadian public. Fourth, we established an inter-parliamentary coalition for human rights in Iran involving American congressmen and senators, European MPs. Some of that has receded somewhat, and I'm hoping that the PGA can fill the breach in that regard. Number five, we worked very closely with the UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in Iran. At the time, it was Ahmed Shahid, who is now the UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion and Belief, and who's continued his work, for example, with regard to the Baha'i and others in that regard. Sixth, we established by way of a parliamentary resolution, and Ali will call this an Iranian Political Prisoner Day, which every year on September 1st, we remember and commemorate the thousands of dissidents who were murdered in the 1988 death squads in Iran. And we have annual programs with the Iranian Canadian diaspora for that purpose. And finally, we have held joint forums, parliamentarians, NGOs, Iranian Canadian diasporas, I mentioned, students and the like, to focus on the human side of what is happening in Iran. For example, we showed a film with regard to the Baha'i, narrated by Maziar Bahari himself, a former political prisoner, now the head of Iran Press Wire. So in each and all of the above, we always wanted to distinguish between the Iranian government and the Iranian people, who are tragically the ongoing targets of repression. In 2016, as Ali mentioned, I retired from Parliament, established then the Raoul Wallenberg Centre for Human Rights, whose first act was to set up a Raoul Wallenberg all-party parliamentary caucus on human rights. And as it happened, not long after we set this up, NASRIN, who was continuously subjected to ongoing arbitrary arrests, persecutions, and prosecutions, was convicted and sentenced in March 2019 on 7 false and absurd charges to 38 years in prison and 148 lashes, a virtual death sentence, for a woman in her mid-50s. Some of the absurdity of these charges, as we set forth in a letter to the Iranian authorities. Now, as I say, 7 charges, but I'll just mention 1 or 2. One was, quote, encouraging corruption and prostitution, for which she was sentenced for 12 years for nothing other than legally representing women tried for peacefully removing their headscarves in public. And you saw the reference to that in the film. Also, for being a member of a group that peacefully advocated against the death penalty, she was sentenced here to 7.5 years in prison. For the absurd charge of publishing falsehoods with the intention to disturb public opinion, which was nothing else but having been involved in some interviews with international media, she was sentenced to 13 years and 74 lashes. Charge of disturbing public order for nothing else but participating in peaceful gatherings of the kind that you see in the film. For appearing in public without a hijab, 74 lashes, and so on. So these were the 7 charges, and I just might add parenthetically that the United Nations experts urged her release, and we incorporated that in our petition to the Iranian leadership in the light of, quote, the multitude of evidence that shows the arbitrary, unlawful, and disproportionate nature of these decisions. And that was just one of the number of times that the UN special rapporteurs or experts, have condemned these unjust decisions. Accordingly, and with this I move to a close, as NASRIN's legal counsel, and in concert with our Raoul Wallenberg Centre for Human Rights, whose 3 pillars in the pursuit of justice actually intersect with NASRIN's case and cause. I'm referring to the promotion and protection of a rules-based international order, defending political prisoners, defending women, human rights defenders, and women's rights. We embarked on the following initiatives. Number 1, we made, as I mentioned, legal representation to the Supreme Leader of Iran to, quote, immediately quash Nasrin Sotoudeh's unjust conviction and sentence. And we did so in a joint submission with the International Bar Association's Human Rights Institute, with PEN America, and the Center for Human Rights in Iran. We wrote an open letter to Iranian authorities calling for the release of women political prisoners, specifically women, including Narj Mohammadi, who you've seen in the film as well, who are languishing in COVID-infested wards. Number 3, we engaged with the UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in Iran and the other UN Special Rapporteurs. And Jeff mentioned the report issued 3 days ago, wherein the rapporteur specifically references Nasrin Sotoudeh's case as a case study in arbitrary detention. Number 4, we engaged with the European Parliament, which in December 2020, called both for Nasrin's release and the imposition of Magnitsky sanctions. Number 5, we sought to engage with world leaders, and I was pleased that our own Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, condemned Nasrin's detention, called for her release, as did, when he was then a candidate for President, Joe Biden in the US and President Macron of France. We also called on women's groups to take up Nasrin's case, which they have done, met with law student groups, and I'm pleased that as a result of the initiatives of these law student groups at Queen's University, in a special convocation ceremony, awarded Nasrin an honorary degree. Recently, the Raoul Wallenberg Centre entered into a joint partnership with the Parliamentarians for Global Action with regard to a project on democratic renewal, and in particular their PART initiative, that is undertaking emergency responses on behalf of imprisoned parliamentarians and human rights defenders, which also provides a framework for advocating on behalf of Nasrin. And I commend to other parliaments with us today and parliamentarians that they consider some of the initiatives that we did in Canada and replicate them in their own parliaments, in their own countries. Finally, and perhaps the most important thing, has been Jeff and Marsha's film, which has been the occasion for holding forums such as this across the country, and whose rayonnement, whose impact has been transformative for Nasrin's case and cause. And I suspect, among other things, contributed to Nasrin receiving the Right to Livelihood Award, the alternate Nobel Peace Prize, and really making people understand both the humanity of the Iranians in the film and our common humanity, as Marsha has mentioned. And so with all this, I'm delighted to give it back to you. I had to introduce Shaparak, who, as I said, was herself represented by Nasrin, and who can provide firsthand testimony about what we have been discussing today.
Let me begin by saying thank you for giving me this opportunity to be part of this panel discussion. and for listening to what I have to say about my lawyer, NASRIN Sotoudeh, and also the plight of Iranian women in general. When I watched the film NASRIN, I couldn't stop crying during the whole movie. My sister told me that she was in tears too. For us, women like NASRIN Sotoudeh or Narges Mohammadi have always been role models. And watching this movie, it wasn't just about NASRIN. Somehow it was the story of all Iranian women and their struggle in Iran after revolution. Yet for me, NASRIN is more. When I got to know NASRIN in person, I admired her more and more. The way she was in those courtrooms, in those scary moments is not describable. I cannot describe it. She saved my life. If I'm here testifying about the suppression on Iranian people and persecution, the persecution of human rights and lawyers, it's all because of her. If my family is safe here in Canada, it's all because of NASRIN. In the movie, we see NASRIN and Reza's love for each other, how they build their life with love, and how the regime tried to destroy it. We see Reza has the same passion for human rights and freedom, and how he supported her wife all along. That's why he also has been arrested and got a 6-year prison sentence. In Geneva Summit 2014, Professor Cutler told the story of his mother, told him that you have to feel the injustice about you. You have to go and about your community and beyond, feel the injustice and combat the injustice. Otherwise, the pursuit of justice is theoretical obstructions. We read about solitary cells. We read about injustice and cruelty in Iranian courtrooms. And we learn about how the interrogations could be terrifying, but it's different when you experience it yourself. It's different when you experience it yourself. Being arrested 3 times and listening to the interrogator threatening my husband in the other room, I cannot describe it. Being arrested with my child and seeing him begging the officers to let us go home, I couldn't do that anymore. In that moment, I realized I cannot be NASRIN or Narges. They not only sacrifice their life, they sacrifice the life of their loved ones. And I couldn't do that. I wasn't that brave. For 40 years, the Islamic Republic of Iran has used the hijab as a tool to repress women. The government and its followers routinely abuse and subjugate women to prevent women from having any important role in society. As a lawyer and former prisoner of conscience, NASRIN knew that with defending women like me, who were protesting against hijab, the Islamic regime's dress code, she would end up in prison again. The first time I saw her, she told me that our struggle is her struggle too. That many times she wanted to go up on a utility box and wave her scarf herself, but she knew that she could support our movement by defending us, by representing us. When I got arrested for the 2nd time, they didn't let me contact NASRIN like the first time. They also arrested my husband. In the afternoon, they took me to see the secretary of the main prosecutor of the capital. After hours of being threatened, insulted, and mental torture, his behavior was quite decent. Yet he threatened me to choose another lawyer. Otherwise, my charges would get worse, like national security charges, he said. I knew deep down that I wouldn't have another lawyer to represent me in courtrooms. 6 weeks later, I arrested again in another city in central Iran. The next day, NASRIN came to that city with my husband. The prosecutor who ordered my arrest wanted to arrest them too. They were planning to keep them in a room to prepare legal documents for their arrest. NASRIN realized that and told my husband that they had to escape that building. So she went to visit the chief of the judiciary in that city. He also told NASRIN to walk away from my case. She didn't. Not only she didn't walk away from my case, but she brought my case to the public eye because she knew what would happen in the courtrooms and during the trial. That's why he got the sentence of having false accusations against the country, because she told the public about the injection I had, the forced injection I had during the time that I was in Qarchak. She told the public that I was beaten up during interrogation. Now I know that she was threatened before many times when she represented Baha'is or juvenile who were facing execution, when she represented political prisoners. Before her first imprisonment, when she represented Nobel Prize laureate Shirin Ebadi, she was also threatened to walk away from her case, but she didn't. The Iranian government doesn't stop by sending these human rights heroes to prison. They also harass their family members to put more pressure on them, even inside prison. In 2018, they arrested Nasrin Sotoudeh's husband, Reza Khandan. After months of imprisonment and hunger strike, they sentenced him to 6 years. Last summer, when Nasrin was on hunger strike, they also arrested her 20-year-old daughter. Her daughter and her husband were banned from leaving the country several times. 8 months ago, they froze all Nasrin's bank accounts. And a few weeks ago, they also froze her husband's bank accounts. Tell me how this family with 2 children, one in university, the other one in school, can survive financially. This is even against Islamic Republic laws, let alone international laws. As Professor Cutler always says, Nasrin's case is a looking glass into the persecution and prosecution of the criminalizations of innocence in Iran. When the Iranian government arrests human rights lawyers like Nasrin Sotoudeh, Amir Salar Davoudi, and Mohammad Najafi, and they get 38 years, 30 years, and 14 years prison sentence just for defending their clients, they're not just targeting the lawyers, they are targeting the laws. They are targeting the basic human rights. When they arrest human rights defenders, they target Iran's civil society as well. I feel grateful every time I see support for my lawyer Nasrin or other activists for their release, but please do not forget their cause. These relentless human rights defenders are in jail because of their commitment to human rights, because they value civil society and trying to have democracy in Iran. And the Iranian government and its officials don't like that. Advocate for human rights defenders and support them, but support their cause too. As you see, in the past few years, we witnessed the increasingly dire human rights situation in Iran, including the imprisonment and mistreatment of hundreds of political prisoners, human rights activists, journalists, environmentalists, leaders of workers' unions, religious and ethnic minority groups, executing of the protesters or journalists, abduction of dissidents and journalists from other countries by Iran's Revolutionary Guard. We expect the international community to support the human rights defenders in Iran. But you can do that more. You can impose Magnitsky sanction, targeted sanction on the Iranian officials who have committed human rights violation in Iran, and the judges who sentence political activists and protesters to executions, and to impose sanction on the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, which is responsible for capturing, torturing, and killing of many innocent activists and protesters, also killing of thousands of innocent people in other countries. We want the Democrats to stand in solidarity with Iranian people. Iranian people want freedom and democracy. A free democratic country, not ruled by a dictatorship regime and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, is a gift to a nation. It's what Iranians want, and it will bring peace to the region. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much, Erwin. Thank you, Shapak. Those were very poignant words, but more than anything else, you both stand as exemplary individuals that we can all learn from in terms of all the hard work that goes into defending amazing people like NASRIN and others around the world. Thank you for your tireless efforts. Now, for the next panel, which is about the role of parliamentarians and what each and every single one of us can do to contribute in championing the plight of individuals around the world. We are very, very pleased to have Rosanna Adam with us. Now, Ms. Adam is well known for many of you. She has served as a member of parliament in the Maldives since 2008. In that capacity, she has been at the forefront of advocating on behalf of children, on behalf of women, and also speaking loud and clear on the need for changing the country's development policies. But we're also fortunate that she has served on the executive of the PGA, and she is now, of course, the chair of a very new initiative introduced by the PGA, which is the Parliamentary Rapid Response Team. Please welcome Ms. Adam. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ali. Esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it's my distinct honor to be here with you today for this panel discussion on the documentary film NASRIN. Not only speaking as a legislator from the Maldives, but also as chair of the PGA Parliamentary Rapid Response Team, known as PART. Before I begin, let me present a short video by my colleague from PART, Mr. Anders Osterberg from Sweden, expressing his support for NASRIN.
Dear all, my name is Anders Osterberg. I'm a member of the Swedish Parliament. I've been a member for several years. I'm standing here because I want to stand with the freedom and release of Nasrin Sotoudeh. I think this is very important. I can also notice that the Iranian regime, they are now afraid, and when they are afraid, we need to continue to be brave and demand her releasement. Here in the Swedish Parliament, I have been debating about her and her case. I've also been asking several questions to the government and asking them for releasement of Nasrin Sotoudeh. I think together we can make a change. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, let me say what an inspiring and touching piece of work this documentary is. I watched it with my 19-year-old daughter, and she's totally of NASRIN. We feel like we know her intimately. Thank you, Jeff and Masha, for sharing it with us. Today, we are discussing how parliamentarians can support at-risk human rights defenders, and in that regard, PART has been highly active. 11 committed legislators from all regions of the world act as first responders, intervening when parliamentarians and human rights defenders are at risk in the framework of a broader campaign to promote democratic renewal and human rights. Who are human rights defenders? The term refers to anyone who individually or together with others work to promote and protect and ensure the fulfillment of human rights, civil and political rights, as well as economic, social, and cultural rights. The case of human rights attorney NASRIN Sotoudeh is emblematic of the way autocratic regimes use the state apparatus to severely repress and descend on the rights of those who fight with their life to defend fundamental human rights of all, especially vulnerable populations. We see autocratic leaders using religion and culture as a means to suppress fundamental human rights, especially that of women and children. This is not acceptable, and there are those like NASRIN Sotoudeh who are not willing to accept this and who are willing to go to any length to fight back. We saw in this documentary a situation where the authorities were using religion as an excuse to continue allowing an abusive father to visit his daughter against the mother's wishes, saying that the father has the right to kill his child even. This is utter nonsense. Islam does not allow child abuse and rape or domestic violence. We see people using religion as an excuse to prevent girls from going to school, to allow child marriage, and even prevent women from learning basic life skills like driving a car. I believe that cultural norms that have been passed from generation to generation, which denies basic human rights and have no positive impact on human lives, should be discontinued. A society needs to grow to encompass ideas which make life better for its people. In Maldives, when I presented the Anti-Domestic Violence Act in 2010, there was one member of parliament who said that we cannot punish husbands for hitting their wives because it was their religious right to do so. There were some male parliamentarians who agreed with him, but who did not dare to voice out their thoughts because, fortunately for us, both the governing party and opposition party leaders were in total agreement about the necessity to pass this bill. And therefore, we were able to pass this bill in 2012, addressing marital rape as well. This was in my early years as a parliamentarian, and I was a bit naive. And so hopeful that the passing of the bill, the number of domestic violence cases would drop drastically. But unfortunately, what NASRIN said in the documentary is very true. It's not just the culture of governance that should change, but the public should change. Ms. Shaparak Shajarizadeh also just mentioned that things have been done to NASRIN also that are against Iranian laws. Despite passing a law, the mindset of the people do not change overnight. Judges went on to pass verdicts on abusive husbands that would be considered a joke. You beat up your wife and you're only fined $15. But as parliamentarians, we continue our work to increase public awareness and to name and shame judges and perpetrators who do not take domestic violence seriously. And I'm pleased to say that we are succeeding. Last year in October, for the first time in the history of Maldives, marital rape was recognized in court. In 2020, according to the Economist Democracy Index, across the world, individuals experienced an important decline in their individual freedoms. As representatives of the democratic branch closest to citizens, legislators must use their parliamentary prerogatives and influence to resist attacks on democracy, shape national agendas, resist incursions from the executive branch, and work with civil society to preserve civic and political spaces. Being on the front lines, parliamentarians themselves are increasingly at risk in contexts of democratic backsliding, and the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated the severity of human rights violations. As parliamentarians, sometimes we are afraid to stand up against cultural injustices due to political pressure and internal power struggles within a country. But most of the time, it is us as lawmakers that can make the most difference. There are times when actions speak louder than words, when a quiet, well-planned strategy works better than making noise. We need to identify the situations and act accordingly. For example, religious extremists are trying their best to take a stronghold in Maldives. To combat this, the best strategy might not be to attack them verbally in parliament, but to plan strategies that would prevent them from getting access to our youth and vulnerable, and to educate people. We have seen in this documentary the work NASRIN herself did as an educator. And then, of course, there are times when we need to raise our voices and stand up. In the previous panel, we have heard the expert presentations of Professor Kotler and Mrs. Shadachizadeh on what parliamentarians can do to support NASRIN. Everywhere in the world, legislators must demand the unconditional release of NASRIN, whose detention is unlawful and politically motivated, as well as the release of all other unlawfully detained human rights defenders. As we have witnessed over the years, legal harassment of human rights defenders, who can also be parliamentarians, have been one of the most used means of repression. This has been the case for Senator Lila de Lima in the Philippines and Senator Ivan Cepeda in Colombia. The response of legislators will depend on the type of threat and violation being addressed. Among the threats encountered, we find attacks on the legislature, closing of civic space, disinformation campaigns, due process and fair trial violations, marginalized groups targeted, limitations on speech and freedom of the press, hate or dangerous speech, persecution of MPs and human rights defenders, and undermining of the judiciary. To address these threats and protect human rights defenders and parliamentarians at risk, we can take actions such as getting informed about the situation or case of human rights defender at risk in our own country and worldwide, and engage in peer-to-peer conversations with our parliamentary colleagues and relevant stakeholders. We can participate in high-level fora such as the United Nations and regional organizations' events, conversations on social media on the cases of human rights defenders and the need to protect them. We can use our parliamentary prerogatives, including official statements, resolutions, draft laws, questions to relevant ministries, to address the individual cases as well as situations and provide adequate legal and policy remedies. We can regularly request relevant ministers to present progress reports on domestic policies concerning human rights defenders, and ensure that our governments participate in the international, regional, and national mechanisms to protect human rights defenders. We can also ensure the implementation of international instruments that protect human rights defenders, Magnitsky sanctions being one of them, and establish and support national protection mechanisms for human rights defenders aligned with international standards and best practices, and allocate sufficient resources to them. And as lawmakers, the most important thing we can do is to vote laws that strengthen the domestic rule of law in line with human rights treaties, as well as the Sustainable Development Goals, including Goal 16 for peaceful, inclusive, and resilient societies, and encourage our international peers to do the same. For particularly sensitive cases, we can use our diplomatic influence with colleagues in other countries to advance the cause of human rights defenders. To conclude, legislators not only have a role to play to support and protect human rights defenders, but they have the obligation to do so. We must not despair in the face of so many atrocities and human rights violations perpetrated, often with impunity. I myself actually got spat on by the majority leader of the ruling party during a live parliament session in my last term in parliament. I have to say, what he hoped would be a humiliation to me actually made me stronger and even more determined in my fight for democracy. We must continue utilizing our prerogatives and mobilize as champions of human rights, democracy, the rule of law, and peace. As lawmakers, we need to understand the impact we can have on society and make the best use of our resources to ensure every citizen enjoys their human and civil rights. I call upon the lawmakers in Iran to stand up for Nasrin and all the other human rights defenders and to work for their release. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosanna. Thank you, first of all, for all the incredible insights contained in your remarks, but also for doing such a superb job leading the rapid response team. Very, very grateful for that. Now, for all of you who are following, there's an opportunity now to ask the various panelists any questions you might have. So please don't be shy. Do make the most of this opportunity. So far, we've had many remarks coming in. Everyone thanking Jeff and Marcia and the panelists for the incredible work that you have done. So I will skip those. One question that has come up by several individuals is obviously there's a lot of interest in the incredible work that Jeff and Marcia have done. So Jeff and Marcia, is there any way that the various members of the PGA around the world can contact you? What would be your preference?
Sure. Can I just mention one quick thing before I do that? Because it's so incredibly moving hearing about good government actions by all these individuals and all the members of this group. We've seen an assault on democracy in the United States over the last 4 years. Erwin was talking about democratic renewal, which is, as much as you may need it in some other country, we need it in the United States right now. And I just think about, passing laws in the Maldives to protect women against abusive husbands and to have them properly legally represented. And that's just this bright, shining example of what people coming together and good government can be. And as depressing as life can be sometimes these days, to me, that's just so inspiring. And it's as inspiring as Nasrin's example. And I just want to thank everyone for believing in that and fighting for that. And for having, and I look forward to having your 19-year-old daughter be head of the Maldives in a few generations. So anyway, yes, you can go to our website, www.nasrinfilm.com, and there's a way to send an email through that, and we'll respond right away. It'll go right to Marcia and me. There's nothing more important than becoming involved and getting active, and we'd love to hear from you.
Yes, we would. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Absolutely. Just to give you an example, Jeff and Marcia, one of the comments that has come in, and we would encourage everyone to visit the site that you suggested, but one of the individuals who's been following says, doesn't matter how many times one sees the film, its impact remains undiminished. So thank you.
Wow. Might I say, if you, thank you so much. And I'm going to now be a producer and say, if you have a chance, I don't know where you've seen the film at a screening or on iTunes or Amazon. It's not on Amazon in Canada, but you can see it at every other place. If you do a little review, I would love it if you would add that. That's a wonderful, perfect, beautiful review. Thank you.
Absolutely. Now, so most of the things that have come in are a general commentary, just saying how incredible the work that is being done around the world has been. So I guess I will exercise my prerogatives to talk about what Jeff just touched on, what all the panelists touched on, which is unfortunately, we live in a day and age where there has been a sliding back, if you will, of countries that are upholding the rule of law. So who better to go to on this issue than Professor Cutler? Professor Cutler, it can be very, very daunting to see developments as they unfold. The last 2 years have not necessarily been the best years for the rule of law around the world. Any particular thing that you would like to add to what we heard from the panelists, or what keeps you going to make sure that each of us does our part to make sure that we try to strengthen civil society and the rule of law around the world?
Well, we're all experiencing in different ways with the related suffering, attending COVID-19. But I want to say that, and we need really global solidarity if we are going to combat this. But I want to say that there are several other pandemics which we have to bear in mind. The first is what I would call the resurgent global authoritarianism, which is not a standalone thing. I mean, we have not talked about Turkey, but just today penned an op-ed on the use of counter-terrorism laws in Turkey for massive domestic repression. And this coming from a NATO member. But what worries me about the resurgent global authoritarianism that we're witnessing in Putin's Russia or Maduro's Venezuela, or in Khamenei's Iran or MBS's Saudi Arabia, or Xi Jinping's China. And as we meet, we should not ignore the fact that we are bearing witness to an ongoing genocide, targeting the Uyghurs in Xinjiang province. And we have to have a sense of moral urgency and political will to address and redress that. But what concerns me is not only that global resurgent authoritarianism, and I use the leaders, again, in each instance to distinguish it from the publics under assault in each of those respective countries, but we've also been witness to a democratic backsliding. And you mentioned this, Ali, and it's even been more than a backsliding. With regard to the last 4 years under President Trump in the United States, we have been witnessing an incipient authoritarianism in the US itself, with its attending assaults on the rule of law, on the independence of the judiciary, on an independent media, and the law. Community of democracies as well. And then we see another epidemic, and that's been the epidemic of systemic racism, which has been afflicting our various democracies. In the US, with the graphic murder of George Floyd, but it only highlighted, it didn't create a situation which had been, in place on the ground, for years and the centuries. And I think the whole question of systemic racism is yet another epidemic that we need to address. And finally, I would say is the epidemic of impunity. In other words, we have not done enough, not only to secure justice for the victims, but to hold the human rights violators accountable. And they have regrettably been able to conduct themselves with impunity. When we speak of Iran, Chief Justice Raisi, and I'll just use this as one example, the Chief Justice Raisi was a member of the 1988 death squads that resulted in the deaths of thousands of Iranian dissidents. Rather than him being held accountable, he was prospectively promoted, becoming also and I think that will continue.
Thank you very much for that, Professor Cutler. Now, another question is, given that Jeff and Marcia have been in touch with NASRIN and her husband for many years, since 2016, would it be possible for you to trace how the fact that there has been more public awareness about her plight and her challenges and the difficulties that her family has been subjected to. How significant has public awareness around the world been to making sure that she is insulated from even worse treatment? I think that's really at the heart of what we all should be doing, raising awareness, educating, and speaking about her and others in similar straits. So could you, Jeff and Marcia, speak to that? How, given the success of your documentary or efforts by numerous people around the world to shed the spotlight on her, how significant has that been?
Well, as Marcia said, during the making of the film, we were extremely careful to be completely secret. We didn't do any fundraising in public. We didn't talk about it. Even up through editing and right before the release, it was always private. And we consulted regularly with NASRIN and Reza about how to go public. And even at the end, we said, should we go public? And they've always urged us to do that. NASRIN has this wonderful quote, which is that our children should not inherit silence from us. And one of the things that regimes like the Iranian regime do is they try to scare families and friends to be quiet about someone who's incarcerated. They say it's to protect that person, but it's really because they don't want to face the world's scorn. So Reza and NASRIN have regularly urged us to be as bold and loud as possible with the film as we can. And that's what we've done. And they would say that it's really the best way to amplify her voice and the voice of others. So it's been immensely gratifying to have partners all around the world show the film, talk about the film like this. And again, it brings attention not just to NASRIN, but to others who are in the same struggle in other countries as well. So the more we can raise our voices on behalf of NASRIN and others, it doesn't put them in, anything can put them in peril, but it doesn't really put them in peril. What it does do is give some blanket of protection. And lastly, we need to remind ourselves that there are so many nameless people like NASRIN who don't have that global protection. Whenever she has a chance to raise her voice, she always mentions people on death row, people who are in need, and we need to keep shining the light as the brightest light we possibly can.
One thing as well, we've had, since the film premiered in October, we've had a lot of events. I see some people in the comments have mentioned they've seen the film at other events or scenes from the film. And it has led to a lot of things. I mean, Erwin mentioned the Right Livelihood Award. Obviously, there was an Eleanor Roosevelt Award that she received in December. We also, there was the German judges, there was an enormous group of lawyers, International Legal Association to put together a petition. And, these came out of a lot of events, impact events we're doing on behalf of the film. And so it makes the world news. These things get out, they're addressed to the Iranian government, they hear about it. I mean, it's still terrible what they're doing, but we do feel, as I said too, not just on a political level, but it means so much to the family. I mean, Reza does hear from people, and it inspires them, and he communicates to NASRIN, in prison, the feedback that they get about the film and the things that are happening. She knows what's going on, and this has really been, I think kept her going. I think Shapra can probably tell you this, that when you're in prison, the worst thing is that people can forget about you, and you're forgotten, and that's it's so horrible to begin with, but it's so demoralizing. And I think all the energy around her, and that energy that we give NASRIN, through the film, making noise, transfers to what she can do for other people in prison. It energizes her. And I just want to address one other thing, because I've been reading the comments, and thank you everybody for your wonderful comments. Literally on our website, it says, when you go there, it says watch now. And we also now have a link directly to the International. And if you have any questions, if you have any trouble finding this movie, not being able to get this movie, wondering where to get the movie, if you're interested in having a screening for your organization, any kind of event that you want around the film, just email us. We get all the emails and we answer them right away. This is very, very important to us. This event today is exactly the kind of thing that we love doing, we want to do, and we want to keep doing.
And just lastly, you'll get a kick out of this, I hope, which is that speaking about emails and Reza, Nesrin's husband, Reza Khandan, about 20 minutes into this event, I got a note from Reza saying, I'm having a hard time watching the event. How do I do it? And I said, don't worry. I think they're recording it. It'll be available. So there's a direct connection right there. And we'll share the link with Reza and his family as soon as I get it from you after this event.
I guess he could see, he sent a message to me, and I sent a link, and he said he could watch the event. That's good, yeah.
It's a reminder that we're also internationally connected.
Yeah, he watches all these things. He does. It's pretty remarkable. It's wonderful. Hi, Reza.
So in the documentary, you talk about the hardships that he is subjected to, his family is subjected to. Shaparak actually did talk about the reality that he no longer has access to banking services, and we all shudder to think, the difficulties that they all face. So one of the questions that was asked, and I'd be grateful if Shaparak could speak to this, if Jeff and Marcia could speak to this. Is there anything that people around the world can do to assist Nasrin's family during these difficult times?
I have no idea, but I cannot imagine what they are going through because of like COVID, especially these days. There are not gonna be any transaction. When even you want to buy something from grocery, then they don't accept cash, and every transaction should be with your cards. And imagine you're not gonna be able to access your bank accounts or your cards, even for one day. It's unimaginable, and they have been through this for months with Nasrin's accounts, and now Reza. I don't know what these people, what the judge who ordered this, ordered to froze his accounts. What would he thinking about this? I don't know. I'm speechless, and that's what it is. It's Iran, and I just want to say that I appreciate Miss Adam for standing up for women's rights, human rights in the parliament. I'm so happy that in Maldives you can change the laws based on human rights fundamentals, but in Iran, as you know, based on Islamic, based on our book and the changes they have in the books, there is one person who can rule over the parliament. So even if the people who are in the parliament, who are all connected to the regime, want to have some changes in law, there's one person who can order not to talk about it even anymore. And it happened many times during different times in the parliament that the leader, Khamenei, said, no more talk about any changes. So in Iran, it's not the parliament, it's not the parliamentarian, even though they are all connected to regime, but it's just the leader. It's just one person who can decide what to do with your life. And he's controlling he's controlling the judiciary, the chief of he chooses the chief of judiciary system. And he has power over the parliament by this order, rule. And it's just the government. And as you know, we're not free to choose our president. There are some, they have to they're gonna choose the ones who who go for election. And that's why nothing is going to change in this country. And unfortunately, after 40 years, we Iranian people realize that they're not gonna be any reforms in our country. And the reformists were just lying to us.
Absolutely. So now the next question that I've received is someone is asking what type of positive measures or incentives could be created by the new incoming US administration to fortify civil society and to assist essentially in defending democracy, not only in Iran, but around the world. Did anyone want to take that question? Any volunteers?
I'll say, I defer to Erwin if he would like to proceed, but I can say something if you'd like.
Yes, let's hear you, Jeff.
Well, I'll do my best. Obviously, there's a very complicated history between the United States and Iran, and the United States can't dictate from outside Iranian internal law, but we can try to build some international trust, in part based on going back into the nuclear accords and using that as a way to advocate for human rights, and also encouraging democratic growth within Iran itself. Change in a country has to come internally. It can't be imposed like with an anvil from outside. But I think having an interweaving of responsibility and respect and some financial connections as well, always with a sense of responsibility for human rights underpinning that is absolutely essential. What we did in the last 4 years was the exact opposite of that. And by ripping up the nuclear accord and by having the Trump administration constantly demonize Iran in every single way, it wasn't about change. It was about domestic politics and other things. So my hope is that the Biden administration, which had sent out the right signals for trying to reestablish some connection with Iran, will be able to take substantial steps in that process. We also have to realize there's an election coming up in about 3 months in Iran, and that may tip to the hardliners. So it's a delicate dance, and we hope in the next few months some progress could be made. Does that match with your expertise, Erwin?
No, I'm just going to say it dovetails with what I would have said. I think that the Biden administration and President Biden's undertaking to make the promotion and protection of democracy and human rights, both domestically in the US and internationally, a priority for the administration. I think that sent a very important message, a message both with regard to the pursuit of a human rights foreign policy internationally, but realizing also that the credibility of that also depends on the respect for human rights and the rule of law within the United States as well. So I think the intersecting dynamics, as Biden characterized them, are very important. And his intention to convene a summit of the community of democracies, because we've been witnessing in the last 4 years, as you know better than I, a kind of isolationist America First presidency, which treated its allies as adversaries and sometimes treated its adversaries as allies. So, I mean, I'm very much hopeful for a difference in tone and content and initiatives and the like. And one of the things that took place just a few days ago, which I think was important, is that on February 15th, 58 countries launched an international declaration against arbitrary detention in state-to-state relations, characterizing such arbitrary detentions, particularly of dual nationals, as a standing violation of international law. The fact that the community of democracies came together for that purpose, I think is important. I just, if I may, mention in that connection, because you both spoke about the fact about political prisoners end up sometimes being nameless and forgotten. And on February 7th, just 10 days ago, Dr. Riza Islami, who's an Iranian Canadian human rights lawyer and environmental law professor at Beheshti University in Iran, was sentenced to 7 years imprisonment. The absurd charge of, quote, cooperating with a hostile state. And all it was is he took a training course in the rule of law in the Czech Republic. I mean, I have a personal interest in this. He was a former student of mine at McGill University. He received his doctorate in law at McGill, but he is a case study of what this declaration on arbitrary detention is all about, protection of dual nationals and combating the hostage diplomacy that is being used in that regard.
Thank you for that, Erwin. Anyone else want to add anything to that question? Sure, of course. Rosanna?
Yeah, Rosanna.
Actually, I wanted to say something regarding what Shaparak said earlier. I mean, it was quite sad to hear you say that you feel so hopeless, but I just wanted to say, please don't feel that way. We had a really hard time. Like from 2013 to 2018 with our last government, we as parliamentarians were not even able to get inside the parliament building. We were thrown out. The military actually came and threw us out of the parliament building. Our Supreme Court judges, ex-presidents, police commissioner, everyone was in jail. A lot of parliamentarians were in jail. So it was a really hard time. And we got the support of the international community, for which we would always be grateful. So you've got people like NASRIN fighting for you, brave people, and you have people like Jeff and people like Professor Erwin Kotler bringing your situation to the focus of the whole world. So I'm sure we'll get there. I'm sure we'll get there. So just don't be so down. We're all with you. I just wanted to say that.
So much. And I want to say, Reza says hi to everybody. And he says that he thank you all, and he's very appreciative for your support.
Thank you for that. I think I have heard someone refer to Mr. Handon, Nasrin's husband, as the Marty Ginsburg of Iran for the exceptional work that he's doing.
He's a wonderful husband and partner and friend and supporter and accomplished human rights activist himself, who is a tremendous human being and loves his wife and is very comfortable, with her, for want of a better word, stardom, stands with her, but also is very accomplished in his own right.
Absolutely. That certainly comes across in the documentary. And one of the things that is highlighted in the documentary is how they both feel that it's their obligation not to be silent, because they have to think long-term about the well-being of not only their children, but of all children in that country, which is truly, truly powerful. So I think that brings us to a conclusion. I should say that in the questions and commentary that we've received so far, many people have indicated an interest in showing this documentary. I understand that it will be shown in the Parliament of the Maldives, which is great to hear. There is someone else who is inquiring about whether, when it will be arriving in China. So on that note, allow me to say that the international version of this documentary will be released on March 8th. It will be in English, but the DVD available in the US through Amazon also has Spanish, as I understand. So I think it's imperative that all of us around the world do the best that we can to raise public awareness. And what better way to do that by accessing the film and showing it around the world. As it's often said, human rights work requires all of us collectively to work together, and our efforts are only as good and only as strong as the weakest link in that chain. So thank you, everyone, for all the inspiring work that you do day in, day out, despite the difficult odds. And we're eternally grateful to all the panelists for their incredible remarks and for their resilience and resourcefulness in making sure that we can all move forward and live in a more rule-based world. Thank you to you all, and keep well and keep safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay safe and healthy, everyone.
Take care.
Take care.